Hello, ladies and gents, hope you're well. And this week I was given the one opportunity to be able to interview Marcy. Now, Marcy is a mindset coach who's kind of jumped out of the corporate world and helps people understand their mindset to grow. But also, we had a great conversation all about perspective in business, but in perspective in life and how you can live in being more grateful specifically. So I'm now going to hand over to Marcy a little bit more to explain about what she does, and I hope to take value from this conversation. And I'll see you in just a moment.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time it is. I'm Marcy McDonald. I'm a mindset coach. I'm an end-of-life doula. I'm an escapee from the corporate world, and I'm a long-time, almost lifelong entrepreneur, except for that little window when I decided to climb the corporate ladder.
Fantastic. And thank you ever so much for the time, and also waking up, I think, ridiculously early for me anyway, for this podcast interview. So I really appreciate it. And I think for me, as we were discussing a little bit before the podcast started, I think there's so much kind of worry, concern, upset, etc. around the recession, around what's potentially coming, about what people can do. And I know because we've discussed before, but for the audience's sake, I mean, how is one's mindset really important in not, I guess, leaning into or focusing on the potential negatives that the reality are probably going to be that we're going to have in the next 5 to 10 years, or potentially even 2 or 3, depending on how long, of course, this reality happens, right? I mean, just to reiterate the question, how important do you think mindset is for someone who's either looking to grow or just looking to stay kind of calm?
Mindset is the difference between breathing or not breathing. It's not fairy dust. It's not your like your grandmother's idea of mindset or some stodgy corporate idea of mindset. Mindset is every single thing you think and feel and how you approach everything in your life. There is no way you're going to survive as an entrepreneur or be a happy person if you don't adjust your mindset during these perilous times, which, because I'm quite a bit older than you, I can say I've lived through many other rounds of great pessimism in the world. And the only thing that's going to make the difference is how you approach not just every day, but every hour and every minute.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think it's something which I'm quite fortunate in some ways, but also not fortunate in others, to say that I haven't actually lived through one yet. But what I say when I'm fortunate is I've managed to have the pandemic at the quote unquote perfect time for my business, for me to use that time to potentially grow. Now, of course, there was atrocities and it wasn't a great time for a lot of people, but what it did allow me to do was lead into this level of perspective and lean into this level of, I get to do whatever it is I do on a daily basis, right? I mean, for you, how do you see perspective as the integral part to your mindset? Because to me personally, it's really important and something that I try to ground myself in every day. And I think if you don't, you can kind of be caught in the negativity or in the news or in what's happening because you don't necessarily appreciate everything you do have going for you.
Actually, life really sucks for people who don't have a growth mindset and a gratitude mindset and a perspective mindset, as you put it. As an end-of-life doula, I have sat bedside with people whose lives are suddenly ending, and they are wrestling with the regrets they have about their entire lives. And this can be whether someone's in their 30s or their 70s. When you do not feel good about the way you've behaved day to day, then life is an ongoing trial. And when you get to the end of it, you have a lot of regrets. So I work with people at the end of their lives to reframe what they did, how they did it, whether they loved, whether they were worthy of love, whether they were kind, what good they did in the world. But in my coaching, I back that up so that we're looking at today. Like, if this were your last day, would you be living it with those same attitudes of gratitude and love and kindness and doing good in the world? When you focus on that kind of perspective, Carlton, then every single day is fine, even if the world is falling apart around you. So I want to give you an example. My sister is having terrible physical problems. Her spine is completely bent, her hip, I mean, it's just horrible. She's in pain that's a 20 on a scale of 10 every single day. But she says, every day is a gift to me. So, yes, I'm in pain, but I still have today. What can I do with it? How can I be loving? How can I be kind? How can I be happy? So, her entire life could be ruined. She might live another 30 years in that pain. She could focus on that pain, just like we can focus on what's going on with the world or the economy. Or she could take each day and make the most of it, which is what we need to do every day. That's the game changer, not the news outside. The game changer is what we're telling ourselves and how we're deciding to live moment by moment.
Yeah, and I think, for me, as I say, I'm very fortunate to be in the position where I have a lot of great values, right? And I think for me, it's allowed me to constantly be grateful for what I do have, right? And I think, health is a key example of that, because obviously the pandemic was a very stark reminder that health can deteriorate quickly. But I mean, for people who struggle with perspective, I mean, the analogy I always use is like, I'm in a country where I have access to all the information potentially I would ever need in the world, and I don't need to worry about my house getting bombed, or I don't need to worry about where my drinking water is coming from, right? But they are quite abstract or quite drastic perspectives, right, to have, because they are referring to unfortunately parts of the world which are a lot less privileged, I think would be the best term to use. And I mean, as a society, right, we are quite privileged, right, in the US, but also in the UK. I mean, how, if someone that's listening to this feels like maybe they are a bit too privileged, or they maybe feel like maybe they don't take stuff for granted as much as they probably should, how would you recommend that they start to?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, I would take the judgment out of the statements that you just said. So, saying, oh, I'm too privileged, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, is a judgment about who you are and what blessings maybe you've been given. So they're not doing any good. That's just a fact. I grew up with running water, or I didn't grow up with running water. There's no judgment about that person within that. But once you start layering that judgment on, then your thoughts and your perspective gets clouded with guilt, which is not a healthy emotion, with self-doubt, which is not a healthy emotion. So that's the first thing I would say. If you're having those thoughts, take a step back and say, wait, let's look at the reality of this, and then let me shift into gratitude about it and say, oh, okay, I was blessed by having these things. I'm still blessed by having these things. Now, what can I do with this? What does this mean for me in my daily life, in my work, as a consciouspreneur, or just when I'm down at the post office or wherever it is? What does this mean for me that I'm able to do that perhaps someone else isn't able to do because they have different circumstances? So separate the facts from the emotions, take the judgment out, and then start shifting into gratitude so that you can see what you can do with it. And when people, I mean, gratitude is a big thing. We see it all over the internet, right? But what most people don't take into account is that when you're making your gratitude list, when you're giving thanks for all the things that you have, I recommend giving thanks for all the good and the bad things. So I start my day with a gratitude list. I end my day with a gratitude list. If things go wrong in the day, I shift into gratitude mode, because you have no idea how you're going to grow or what will be affected downstream from whatever happened. So here's an example. When I was 15, my mother, who was psychotic, schizophrenic, and manic depressive, just completely lost control of her mind. And I come from a big family, but I was the only one home at the time. I walked in from my part-time job and saw her burning our birth certificates in the sink because she said they were forged. I turned to the phone hanging on the wall to call somebody. I didn't really know who. It was all long distance calls then, but she had ripped the phone off the wall because she said it was bugged and she was trying to protect us. So here I was 15 and didn't know what to do. Long story short, I ended up being shifted into my father's custody. Now, years later, 50 years later, I looked back on that. I had to leave my high school, all my friends from childhood up, and yet I could suddenly see the positive impact that came from that drastic shift in my life. In fact, numerous positive outcomes that I never would have anticipated. Now, I held on to resentment and hurt for that for a long time. All that resentment and hurt just crowded out the beauty in my life anytime it came up. I didn't know, looking at that time, that things would work out or that it would be for the best. We don't ever know that. But if you trust in that and you give thanks for the bad as well as the good, then you're able to get back on your horse and deal with what's in front of you and be grateful for all of it, which is a major shift in your perspective every single day. So you can't just be grateful for the good things. You have to be grateful for the things you don't understand, for the bad things, even for the lousy economy throughout the world right now. If you're grateful for it, then you energize yourself to be present in the moment and do the stuff you need to do to be living a good life, to be being a good person, to be having an impact. But the minute you let all that stuff cloud your head, you're incapacitated.
And I think it's you know, I mean, just as you were saying there, it reminds me of a conversation I had about a month ago with a very long-term friend of mine, and she asked me, you know, would I change anything about myself, right? And I said no, because for that exact reason, because I've learned things from the things that are darker, or the mistakes I've made, or etc., that have allowed me to become the person I am today. In the same way, would I change the state of the economy? Would I change the reality I find myself in as a business owner? No, because it allows me, and it's going to allow me to focus on, firstly, okay, why am I good? How do I serve my clients, etc. But also, how can I grow? Because in this time, you're either going to sink or swim, right? And I think sometimes, you know, there's a lot of talk in the entrepreneurship world around, like, should you have a backup plan or etc., right? And I'd be curious on your opinion, because a lot of the time when you go down the kind of like motivational roads on TikTok or etc., there's a lot of this talk about, like, no, you shouldn't have a plan B, because then it's all in, or it's do or die, or those kind of terminologies. And I think for me, it's about, you shouldn't necessarily have a plan B in respect to a separate business, but you should have a diversified business, e.g. a business that has different revenue streams within it. So it's not just so reliant on, for example, for me, my top end, which is video production. Okay, how can I take my skill and my knowledge that I have and turn that into something that's potentially valuable, but at a lower price point for less of my time, energy, or resources, right? And I think for me, I mean, what's your opinion on people who, quote unquote, would say, you know, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or you're going to go into business, that you shouldn't have a plan B, right? It should be do or die.
Okay, there's so much woven into what you just talked about, because first of all, anybody who says should, or once you start getting into should not, then you start getting into the world of judging negatively if you do or don't. Whereas what we're really talking about is do you have a logical plan for your business? And that business includes your being able to be both committed and focused, and at the same time flexible. All those things are what feed into a successful business, because all businesses have to pivot at some point. So should you have a like be all in or have a backup plan. I think if you go in sprints, then you're going to be able to adjust as you needed. So I suggest 90-day sprints usually. And if you're paying attention to every single day and you're going all in terms of your focus and not getting distracted in your head, you're going to be able to very quickly see, is it working or is it not working? That's just a fact. Is it working? Is it not working? There's no judgment in it. If it's not working, then you're going to pivot and you're going to learn from what's going on or what's not going on. Sprints are super helpful for that. Multiple income streams are very, very prudent for anybody in business. Everybody I know who's an entrepreneur actually brings multiple skill sets to the table, as well as areas where they're not very skilled that they need to be jobbing out so they don't go crazy and waste time on the things they're not experts at. When you have multiple income streams, like you were talking about with the video, having different layers, then it enables you to pay attention and shift if things are working or not working. And sometimes it might be that one goes better than another, but then it comes back up. Things go in waves. So for myself, I have a lot of skill sets because I was in the corporate world. Plus, I was a freelance editor and writer for decades, and I've worked in video production. I've done all kinds of things. So I am able to shift. If a client comes to me who needs a certain thing, I can create that package, even if it's not my main thing. So I think the key here is being able to be flexible, be all in when that's what you're doing. When you're in the middle of deep focus, go all in. Don't be distracted by everything in your head, and have a mindset that enables you to be nimble and aware, focused, and flexible.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
And I think, for me, it's about, as you say, I'll give you an example, like when I'm here creating this podcast, my focus is not on what do I need to do after this podcast, what did I do before this podcast, what did I do after this conversation. It's let's focus on this conversation. Let's focus on how can I facilitate this conversation to be as valuable as possible, right? For me, that's where sometimes people get wrong with content, because they are not. And I had a couple of one-to-ones before this podcast, and something common that was coming up in my head as I was listening to people was actually I took a different approach today, and I think it's something I'm going to continue to do. And it's about listening and asking questions more than feeling like you need to talk about you a lot. Because the thing is, when we talk about us a lot, we sometimes miss actually how could we be valuable, and we're not giving the chance for the opportunities where we could add true value, and we're actually not, I guess in some ways, letting people have natural intrigue in what we do, right? Because let's say we've been talking for half an hour, 40 minutes, and I haven't spoken about me at all yet, and we've just talked about you. Naturally, what will happen is that person will be now intrigued around what I do, because I'll have made subtle hints or etc. around what I'm doing. And I think it can actually either give you really powerful insights into your market, but also it can kind of have opportunities to either get another call or to actually have a potential sales opportunity or that kind of conversation, right? And I think it's really powerful when you're there, because it's one of those things where sometimes when we leave stuff out, or when we leave pauses and we leave gaps, I mean, one of the common things that I'm sure you found as well is when people start networking or one-to-ones, they struggle with in general, actually, to be fair, it's not even necessarily in the networking space, but they struggle with a kind of awkward pause or like a moment of silence. And I know this is something we discussed when we first caught up in our one-to-one, but I mean, how would you, what is your perspective on how people should either deal with or be aware if they do find it difficult to sometimes have that awkward pause or awkward silence or just some silence in a call sometimes?
It's a really, really good question. And I will say that I used to be terribly guilty about not really listening. I thought I was, but I would actually be in my head and trying to figure out what my clever answer would be, or what I needed to comment on next to show myself off. I didn't think of it that way, but that is what I was doing, was trying to figure out how can I prove myself in this conversation by having the clever answer, which meant I wasn't really listening. When you are dealing with a relationship with your client or your potential client, it has nothing to do with your clever answer. It has nothing to do with how you position yourself. It has everything to do with whether you really are hearing that other person. And that means you have to shut up that voice in your head, the mindset voice that's saying, oh, well, I could say this, and just listen. And when you go into that deep space of what I call active listening, then you're able to really hear the pains that your client or potential client is dealing with. And if you're struggling with staying in that space, in the end of life doula world, it's called holding space. Remember that most people never feel heard. It's one of the things that makes one-on-one conversations and coaching so powerful. People don't feel heard. And right now, people are desperate to be heard. So if you remind yourself every time the voice comes up that says, oh, I need to be making these points, or I need to be doing this, or I should mention how brilliant I am at this, notice it. Just notice it, because when you start saying the I, it says you're not listening, because the listening should all be about that other person or people that you're with. Even if you're giving a talk or a workshop, you might have a lot of valuable content that you're sharing, but you're still trying to pay attention to, where is it not working? Where are they not getting it? What are the gaps that I'm missing? Because actually, all the income is made in the gaps.
And I think it's a really, I mean, again, that's why I think it's really important to sometimes give them, we teach a technique known as the pause technique, because so many people, when they start video, they're etc. And what's happening in your brain is your brain's going, I don't have anything else to say right now, so I'm going to insert a filler word. And the thing is, once you can change that habit to say, I'm going to pause and take a momentary pause or momentary breath, and then go into my next piece of delivery, it does one of two things. Number one, it will calm you because you're breathing, and you're breathing in. But also, number two, it allows your audience to take a moment to reflect on what you just said. And it will also naturally give emphasis, especially if it was a question or a statement on the end of that point, that will have more emphasis on it because there's a gap instantly afterwards. So the person's brain or the audience member isn't going to necessarily have another piece of stimuli just attached to their brain. And that's why I think really active listening is really important. I mean, a lot of people who consume the podcast or listen to the podcast either want to be marketers, they want to go into marketing, or they actually genuinely need to be marketing, right? So, I mean, in your experience, how does active listening really play a vital role within how we come across in potentially either finding our pain points for our clients or actually how we market ourselves?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, great advice that you're giving to people about the pause. Pause is so powerful. And a lot of people, when they're making their sales calls or their marketing, they forget about the pause altogether. It's always about the person on the other side, not about you, really. No matter how brilliant you are or wonderful your solution is, if they don't feel the emotion in it, in the pain points tied to your solution, they're not going to hire you. So that's that key point to bring back to your marketing and to your content. Sometimes if you present the pain points well enough, then you can present an astute, fresh observation about how to shift those pain points in a way people haven't thought of before, but only if you've caught their heart. Doesn't matter if they're buying a car or shoes, or in my case, one-on-one coaching or group coaching or video, you need to capture what it is they are worried about, afraid of, not confident about, and assure them that you are going to hold their hand to get them to that vision of themselves that they have. It's all about the pain and it's all about the vision. And I mean, everybody says that. Any online course that you take or workshop that you do, they're going to tell you that. The difference is in applying it, I say take great notes when you're listening. Leave those pauses for the person you're interviewing, like if you're doing a focus group to find out about your pain points, leave that silence there and take great notes and then ask good questions. Coaching for me is all about listening really deeply and then unpacking what I see through more questions that bring people deeper and then unpacking it and trying to find the patterns underneath the clutter. Our lives are, I mean, that's what mindset is, mostly clutter for most people, right? Anybody who can shine a spotlight in even one corner of that clutter and clear a path in the mind about how life could be if they just had this product or they had this service or if they just did this. Oh my God, it's like, oh, I can breathe again. I can breathe. This person is going to take care of me. We forget when we have products that it's about taking care of a need for someone else so that they can breathe in some way in their life. Ah, I don't have to worry about this anymore. Carlton's got me.
I think, for me, I think a lot of what I resonate there is around the focus point, right? Like, so much of, as you write when you articulated, but just to add to the clutter in one's mind, I think that comes from, and I'd be curious to hear whether you agree, doesn't surely that comes from the amount of stimuli, the amount of content, the amount of noise, the amount of advertising, the amount of attention grabbing, quote unquote, stuff we have nowadays, right? We've always had this, the medium in which it's been articulated to us has changed with the internet and so on, but the principle has actually been, hey, I want your attention over here, and then someone at the same time is going, hey, no, I want your attention over here, right?
Yeah, it's hard to battle that. And if you're marketing and you're trying to get, wave your red flag and say, hey, look at me, that can be very frustrating, especially for new entrepreneurs to try to carve out your space. That's where being really authentic, I think, makes a big difference. And that's actually tied to your listening, your cueing into the emotional feelings that your clients have, being consistent, and just being true, not trying to be clever. Just be real about how you serve and how you can serve and what they're feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's about being empathetic to that person, right? I mean, it kind of leans into my next question, which was if you could talk to someone who, or yourself, when you were at the start of your career, what 3 bits or 2 bits of advice would you give to them that you feel is going to be the most meaningful as they develop in their career?
One is pay attention to what you're telling yourself about yourself, and then separate it into facts and emotions or feelings or stories. When you are aware of it, then you can learn to set aside those feelings and stories and focus on the facts so that you can keep moving forward. Some people hate the term self-sabotage, or they don't even believe in it. But at the beginning of my career or any career, one of the biggest problems isn't that you don't have a great idea or you don't have the smarts or the discipline. It's that you don't believe in yourself. And so you constantly self-sabotage. So the first thing I would say is just notice what you're telling yourself and then work on that. Get some help working on that if you need help working on that. Most people can't even hear themselves, but you can notice by paying attention to what your body is feeling. So if you start to feel tense, your stomach's hurting, your neck's hurting, your shoulders are hunched up, that's your body telling you, hey, you're actually not in a positive mindset. So what's going on here? So that's the number one thing. The second thing I think I would say is remember that it's not carved in stone. We were talking earlier about pivoting and doing sprints. And the fact is, when you start out with a business, you don't really know what's going to work. Even if you've done lots of research, which I hope you have, on what your clients actually want as opposed to what you want to give them, and you've had lots of conversations with your potential avatar, Still, once you start working with people and doing your marketing, you're going to learn stuff. So don't be locked into rocks, have your feet encased in cement because that's what you had decided you were going to do. 9 times out of 10, you're probably not right at the beginning, but you have some ideas which will lead you, if you're paying attention, to what will actually work. So don't plan on your initial plan being the final
I
plan.
think,
Flexible. Be
yeah, I
flexible.
really agree with that. And I think, it makes me think of, just as you were mentioning there, about how I personally goal set. And for me, it's not common how I goal set, because for me, like, the point of a goal is to be that carrot on a stick that you currently try to always obtain, right? But for me, it's important to establish the relationship you then have to achieving the goal, right? Because if you're going to set a goal that is really hard to obtain and you don't hit it, if you're emotionally tied to whether you achieve that goal or not, when you don't hit that goal, or potentially if you don't hit that goal, it can be very destructive. And that's where I think it's important to either establish, are you going to emotionally tie yourself towards the goal, and then it should be an achievable goal, or are you going to have the goal of, this goal is ridiculous, but it's always going to be the thing I'm chasing, right? For me, I would rather have something I'm always chasing, because there's lots of psychological studies that say actually when we achieve a goal, it's not actually when we really enjoy it the most. When we enjoy it the most is when we're currently trying to pursue whatever that is, right? So I'll use a really simple example. When I'm training towards the marathon, that is when I'm the most excited about doing the marathon. After I've done the marathon, it's like, well, I've done it. It's kind of like, okay, well, what next? Right? And I think for me, we can do the same in business, we can do the same in mindset, we can do the same in fitness, we can do the same, etc. And I think it's really important. It kind of leans back into perspective as well, to an extent, because my pros and cons are not going to be the same as your pros and cons. So is it a fair comparison for me to say, oh, I'm going to copy Charlie's goal or Bob's goal or etc.? Well, no, because they haven't had the same pros that you've had. You haven't had the same cons that you've had, right? So I think this is where the principle of loving oneself, but also it being you v you, is really important. I mean, for those people who are worrying about that or don't know how to necessarily like change their mindset around like it being, because as a society we're very competitive, right? And we're always going to look to others to say, oh, this person's doing really well, or etc. I mean, what would you suggest people do if they are looking to change their mindset so it is more me v me more than me v my competition?
Well, I'm going to add a third point to my list before, and I'm going to weave that into what you just asked. So my third point, whether you're just launching a business or you've been at it for a while, is that it's vital that you pay attention to how you're feeling about what's going on. And that can mean that you notice that you really hate doing certain aspects of the business, and you need to work on shifting your mindset as long as you can't afford to pay someone else, or you need to pay someone else to do it so that you can start filtering out what you're good at and what you're not good at. It might also mean that you took a direction in your business that no longer aligns with what you really wanted to be doing, or that something about the business has changed. So by way of example, when I first left my corporate job, I actually was doing something very different. I used to work for a very high-end video and audio production company creating lecture series for lifelong learners. And I oversaw all content. We shot out in the field. We did, 4-camera video shoots, and I worked with amazing experts from all over the world. So when I left, I naturally started consulting and coaching in that arena. And after about 5 years, I realized that I was making good money, but I was hating what I was doing. I was getting clients that I didn't respect. They were, the whole online course world had shifted, And there were many, many people trying to get into that space because they'd learned online that they could make tons of money with online courses and it was great passive income. And they didn't care about teaching. And my thing had always been, let me help you be the best possible teacher you can be so that people take your courses and they're blown away because they understand things in a way they never could before. And over the course of a couple of years, I just kept getting people who just, they didn't care how they taught. They didn't care how it was received. And I realized I had to shift. So you have to pay attention to whether you're happy or unhappy in what you're doing, as well as whether it's working. Just pay attention. And so that brings us to this question of me in the world of competitiveness. It's, yes, we're competing against other people. You're competing against video production companies. I'm competing against other mindset coaches. But that really doesn't matter. When you start doubting yourself about whether you can compete against them or worrying or fretting because, oh, it's so competitive, that's all just garbage that you're putting in front of you. It's like you're saying to yourself, you know what, I'm going to walk down this road, but I'm going to go barefoot. I'm going to throw a bunch of rocks and glass in the road. And oh yeah, I'll put a bunch of boulders in my way so that I can't get where I'm going. That's mindset. You might be saying, I'm not good enough or I don't want to be competitive. Just clear that crap out of your head. Put some good hiking boots on, see what barriers are there and keep pushing them out of the way and be authentic, paying attention to yourself and what's working for you and what's not working. And that's what enables us to succeed because it's a long, lonely, hard road being an entrepreneur, being anybody. But if your mindset's not there, it's going to be longer, it's going to be harder, and you're not going to be happy and you're not going to be successful. That's why, to circle back to where we started, it is all about your mindset. So notice what you are putting in your way because you're the only one doing it, my friend, you. But that means you are the one who can change it. That's power. That's fantastic. I love that about our brains and our abilities and our capabilities in this world. That's why I don't get depressed about everything going on. I'm not happy about it, but it's all about what I uncover in my own path, what light I shine. And I'm capable of doing that. Just as everyone listening to this is capable of doing that. They might need help. I mean, they probably do because we're not trained to be able to clear out the junk in our heads. We're kind of trained to cram more junk in, but we can. Our brains are plastic, and with the right guidance, you change all those mindset habits and you get stuff done. It doesn't mean that you're perfect or that you're happy or that you're going to make $100,000 today. It means that you're going to be able to keep on that journey, pivot when it's not working, and enjoy every single day of it because it's a new challenge. We get to do this. Wow. I mean, wow, Carlton, this is so exciting that everybody listening who's got an idea about what they want to do is so blessed. And they get to do it differently tomorrow if it didn't work today. Wow.
And I think it's a really powerful message to end on, but it also it's nice when podcasts go full circle because it leans into perspective as well, right? Because so much of what we do and how we do it, right? So if I make a mistake today or something doesn't go the right way, okay, I'm in the position, I have the perspective that today in the grand scheme of my life is actually a very tiny percentage or a very tiny amount of time, right? So actually, and it can build my character, it can build who I am, it can build what I potentially can become. But for me, that was kind of everything I wanted to discuss. And what I'd like to throw in at the end is an opportunity for you to ask me a question or throw in a topic for us to discuss for the next couple of minutes before we wrap up. So do you have anything?
Yeah. I'm going to shift out one of the questions you asked me about, what advice at the beginning by saying, if you had just today, this was your last day, but you knew you wanted to work it, what would be the one most important thing for you to focus on today in leaving a legacy with your business and to the world?
I think that's a really important question, and the reason why I mention that is I've lived for a long time with the mindset of it might be my mum's last day, it might be this person that I like's last day, it might be my last day, right? So when you live in that perspective, and I'll answer the question directly in a moment, but for me, it allows you to have a lot of kind of top-down view on what you're doing. But also, for me, what I would spend my last days doing is what I spend the most of my time doing nowadays, to be honest, which is sharing through content the stories and the abilities and the knowledge that I have, because in most cases that will stay around longer than I will, right? Like this podcast conversation hopefully will outlast me, right? And potentially outlast you, and actually outlast the platform potentially that it's been on. And what I mean is not necessarily the piece of content, e.g. the podcast itself, but the people who consume it and the people who take knowledge from it potentially are going to pass that knowledge on to someone else, and so on and so on and so on. And for me, that's what legacy is. That's what actually trying to make meaningful change and what we believe is good change actually is. It's about sharing how do we feel that we can become better versions of ourselves every day. What can we do? And for me, specifically the point of this podcast is to share the mistakes I've made, the things I've learned, the things I see working, and also bring on other experts like yourself who are more experienced than me, who have their own journeys, who have their own experience, to be able to showcase that and be able to highlight. And if one person listens to this and it nudges them in the right direction, fantastic. That's exactly the point. And I think for me it's really important to have these conversations, and I think that's how meaningful change, quote unquote, is made, right? I think that's how we can push society forward in a more caring way. And I think that's the important bit, because so much of the world is negative, so much of the world is there's this going on, there's that going on, there's, as we've discussed today. But I think the commonality of maybe a silver lining that we saw through the pandemic was actually human kindness, and and humans being kind to each other is something that we've done for the foreseeable future, and for the foreseeable past, and hopefully we'll continue to do for the foreseeable future. But for those people, feel free to add anything that I just discussed as well, but for those people who are interested in carrying on this conversation after this piece of podcast or after this piece of content, where's best for them to reach out to do that?
The best way is to jump on my website and look at some of my videos and content, excuse me, and you can use the contact form to reach out to me. Also have a simple free gift, which is 7 steps to silence your inner critic, because I think what we're telling ourselves, noticing that, shifting that is such a powerful tool. So I just like to help people jump onto that. So that's selfmasterytransformation.com, because I believe everybody can change themselves to be that ripple in the pond for everybody around them. No, just to remember that today may be the only day you have. So live it, love it, and learn from it.
Hello, ladies and gents, welcome back. I hope you took value from that interview. If you did, I would love to know what you think in the comment section down below. And I'll be back very, very soon with a brand new conversation, talking to a brand new expert, all about how you can grow your business in 2022 and through, of course, this economic challenge that we're all going to be facing. But thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me once again. And I'll leave Marcy's links down in the description down below for those who are interested. And I'll see you very,